Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. We have started the book titled The Psychic Life of Jesus, written by Rev G, Maurice Elliott, published in 1938 by the Spiritualist Press. If you found me here at this video and would like to catch up with the previous chapters, feel free to visit the book playlist and catch up on those chapters there. If you'd like to get started, hit the description and you'll see this timestamp and you can move right along with that. I'm going to spend a minute here and share my narrator's comments. The previous chapters, Reverend Maurice Elliott spoke again about many of the miracles performed by Jesus. One of the interesting points that he brought up was how Jesus had very little support from his family. They thought that he had gone mad, and literally he had to actually separate himself to go on and do his work, and therefore find, his 12 disciples that, believed in him. How many times have we come across a very similar situation to understand that feeling that those that are nearest to us don't believe in us? And too often we have to make our own family with strangers. And to know that Jesus did not think himself beneath anyone as far as receiving help. As they said, he was paid with thank offerings, and that's how he was able to support himself, doing his works from city to city. And another point that I want to share, when the author was talking about the exorcisms, and he had mentioned that the Pharisees did practice exorcism, and they used smoke and water and magic herbs and incantations. One thing that I haven't heard yet, Jesus never used all that stuff. Yet the Pharisees were accusing Jesus of doing the devil's work. And I liked the smart response that Jesus offered to the Pharisees when they attacked him on that point, responding, would Satan, the head of the organized kingdom of evil spirits, whose object it is to bring men and the world under his dominion, cast out his own servants? And if that wasn't strong enough, then he said, if, as you say, I cast out devils by the prince of the devils, by whom do your exorcists cast them out? So that was really interesting. That kind of put a conundrum to those Pharisees, right? I would say that Jesus had a sense of humor. All right, let's move on to the next chapter. 11. Did Jesus raise the dead daughter of Jairus? If he did, it was not a unique occurrence. Elijah is said to have raised the dead son of a widow. Elisha is said to have raised the dead son of the lady of Shunem. Peter is said to have raised dead Dorcas. Paul is said to have raised dead Eutychus. Jesus is said to have raised 3 dead persons. But were these 7 persons actually dead? Were their souls, their psychic or spiritual bodies, severed from their physical bodies? In the case of Jairus' daughter, Jesus did not say that she was dead. The servants told Jairus that his daughter was dead and that it was useless to trouble Jesus any further. But Jesus said, "The child is not dead, but sleepeth." How could he have known that? He had not seen the child. He must have known it through his gift of clairvoyance or clairaudience. When he reached Jairus' home, he found that already the professional mourners were announcing the supposed death to the neighborhood, making a dreadful noise, wailing and tearing their hair and clothes. And when Jesus told them that the child was not dead, they laughed him to scorn. Curious how professional grief can behave. Jesus ejected them just as he had driven out the traitors from the temple. He could do no mighty works where there was unbelief. When Peter was about to raise Dorcas, He, like Jesus, drove out the professional mourners. Derisive and scoffing thoughts nullify psychic power. Thoughts are things. They produce vibrations. Jesus could only work in accordance with natural, scientific, psychic laws, i.e., where conditions were harmonious. Jairus and his wife, and those three great mediums, Peter, James, and John, were permitted to enter with Jesus the child's room. Doubtless the faith of the father and mother and the psychic power emanating from the three mediums aided Jesus in restoring the child. The three synoptists, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, report that he took her by the hand, which suggests that the healing was partly due to his personal magnetism. He was a battery of magnetic power. Dr. Luke says, the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power came forth from him, and he healed them all. The child had not died. She was most probably in a state of catalepsy, and the statue-like fixedness of her body and the limbs had conveyed to the ignorant servants the impression that she was dead. With her hand in Jesus, Jesus called to her, "Little girl, I am telling you to rise." The vibration of the spoken word helped to recall her to herself, and she got up and at once began to walk. We do not yet fully understand the vibratory power of the spoken word, but spiritualists who attend sittings for investigation called seances know how important it is to speak to those who are trying to manifest their presence. In the case of the raising of the widow's son at 9, Jesus again administered magnetic healing. He touched the bier, and he again used the power of the spoken word. "Young man, I am telling you to rise." The fact that the young man had been put on a bier is no proof that his psychic body had been severed from his physical body. Jesus did not say that he was dead. And, as everybody knows, there are any number of cases on record of persons who have been pronounced dead who were not dead. Persons have been known to live for weeks even when, from a medical point of view, there was not the slightest evidence of life. Fakers in India have been buried in the earth for as long a period as 9 months and have not died. It is therefore unnecessary and surely unreasonable to assume that the persons raised by Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, Peter, and Paul were actually dead. Psychic scientists know that once the psychic cord which connects soul and body is severed, there can be no resuscitation of the body. And we have no reason whatever for assuming that Jesus or anyone else has ever raised the dead. They have assuredly raised or healed those who were dying, but not those who were dead. But was not Lazarus dead? There's no good reason to think so. Let us study the story closely. Lazarus had been taken ill, and his sisters, Martha and Mary, sent to tell Jesus. Jesus said, "This sickness is not unto death." How did he know that? He must have gained the knowledge clairvoyantly or clairaudiently. If Lazarus had died from the sickness, Jesus would have been wrong in his prediction. But so certain was he that the illness would not prove fatal that he made no attempt of any kind to hurry to his friend's bedside. He remained 2 days where he was. Then he said to his disciples, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I am going to waken him." The disciple, thinking that he meant natural sleep, exclaimed, "Sleep will do him good. He will get better." But Jesus knew through his psychic ability that Lazarus was in the cataleptic state, that his sister and friend had mistaken his strange condition for death and had actually swathed him in grave clothes and put him in a cave which they had sealed with a boulder. He knew, too, that his disciples would hear that Lazarus had been in the cave 4 days, and that what they would regard as death had certainly taken place. So he told them plainly that Lazarus was not in a natural sleep, but was what they would call dead, i.e., stone cold, with no pulse and no audible heartbeat. Jesus then set out for Bethany, and on nearing the village, remained outside. Martha went out to meet him, and in her grief cried, "Had you been here, Lord, my brother would not have died." Later, Mary came to Jesus, and falling at his feet, uttered the same cry. When Jesus saw Mary wailing and the professional mourners with her making their usual noise, howling and tearing their hair and clothes, he groaned in spirit and shuddered. Scholars tell us that the word translated groan always refers to a strong feeling, either in deprecation of something apprehended or in condemnation of what has already been done. I suggest that here it means both. Jesus deprecated the sisters' distrust of his message, "This sickness is not unto death," and he condemned their folly in allowing Lazarus to be bound in grave clothes and put in a cave. The Jews were but echoing the thoughts of Mary and Martha when they said, "Why did he not prevent Lazarus from dying when he could open the eyes of the blind?" Jesus wept. Can we wonder? 2 of his dearest friends had distrusted him, preferring rather to be guided by visible manifestations of death than by his word. Groaning again, Jesus went to the cave, and having ordered the men to roll back the boulder, called loudly to Lazarus, "Come out!" And Lazarus came forth. The church has regarded the raising of Lazarus as a stupendous miracle, and has used it as proof of the unique powers of an altogether unique person, a person who was different in kind from mankind. If that were so, then Elijah, Elisha, Peter, and Paul were different in kind from the rest of humanity. But it was not so. Had Jesus been different in kind from ourselves, he would never have said that his followers would do the works that he did and greater works. The church has not thought this subject out to a finish. She has failed to realize that in believing that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, she is tied to the belief that Jesus was mistaken in thinking that the sickness was not unto death. And when all is said and done, we have to remember that this story of Lazarus is only to be found in the 4th Gospel, which was written many years after the other 3. It seems almost unbelievable that no reference is made to the incident by Matthew, Mark, or Luke, for it was of immense significance. And it is equally unbelievable that these 3 evangelists had not heard of it. I have it on excellent authority that in the sultry climate round about Bethany, burial followed immediately upon death, and that it sometimes happened that even a swoon was mistaken for death, and the buried man came to life again. In the absence of anything approaching exact medical knowledge, we can well understand that diagnosis could easily be inaccurate. The story of the raising of Lazarus presents no real difficulty to those who have studied the findings of psychic science, but To those who have not, it must bristle with difficulties from beginning to end. End of chapter. We will now move on to chapter 12. After Jesus had healed Jairus' daughter, he went home with Peter. On the way, 2 blind men who had heard that the great healer was passing by followed him and kept crying out, "Have pity on us, Son of David." Jesus took no notice. He had a very strenuous day. Multitudes had thronged him. A woman had touched his garment and drawn power from him. Still more power had gone from him with the healing of Jairus' daughter. He was tired and wanted to get home, and his psychic faculty had revealed to him that the blind men were not in the right condition to be healed. But the 2 men continued to follow him to the door of Peter's house, and when he had gone in, they came to him. By this time, their faith had been greatly stimulated by their determination to get close to him. They had doubtless been told that the whole multitude had sought to touch him, for power went forth from him. So Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I can cure you of blindness?" They answered, "Yes, we do." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, be it done unto you." Had he touched their eyes sooner, it would have had little or no effect. He therefore waited till their faith had been sufficiently stimulated to produce the necessary receptive condition. Then his touch healed them. "My daughter," said a delighted mother, "is now 23 and had been blind in her right eye ever since she had measles 19 years ago. The doctor said the pupil had been eaten away by abscesses." But after the healing service in the church where that great healer, J.M. Hickson, had laid hands on her, the pupil was there and her sight there also. Another young woman, totally blind in one eye, pronounced incurable by one of the best oculists, instantly received her sight. She went to the oculist, who said her sight was now perfect and that he could only explain it as a miracle. Hickson did, and others are doing, many of the works that Jesus did. "These signs shall follow them that believe. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover." Jesus worked in accordance with natural, spiritual, psychical laws. So did Hickson. So do our healers today. There are no miracles. There are laws. At Bethsaida, a blind man was brought to Jesus to be healed. Those who brought him begged Jesus to touch him, but the great healer saw that the man was in no receptive condition to be healed. So he took hold of his hand and led him outside the village. Observe here the vast difference between a healer taking hold of a patient and touching him. If the blind man had been in a receptive condition, Jesus could not have taken hold of him without touching him. But, as it was, the man's unreceptive condition had insulated him from the magnetic healing power of Jesus. He had, therefore, to remove this insulation before any healing could be done. To do this, he led him outside the village, away from the atmosphere of unbelief. It was Bethsaida that Jesus denounced for its unbelief. "Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida!" We can imagine the kind of conversation Jesus had with the man who seems to have found it very difficult to exercise faith. I noticed that this man had been brought by others to Jesus, whereas the 2 blind men had appealed in person to him. In any case, Jesus saw that there could be no instantaneous cure, but that the man would have to be healed gradually, and that tangible means suitable to his state of mind would have to be used. Moisture from the mouth was, in the East, thought to have healing properties, as it probably has. And the man well knew that laying on of hands was done with a view to the transference of divine power and blessing. So Jesus anointed the man's eyes with saliva and placed his hands on them and asked, "Do you see anything?" He answered, "Yes, I see men, but they are like trees walking." He was gradually regaining his sight, but he saw things in unnatural dimensions and indistinct outline. Chalcedon's account of the cure of a man blind from birth is interesting at this point. When first he saw, he did not know the shape of anything, nor one thing from another, however, different in shape and magnitude. Thus do medical records bear witness to the naturalness of our story. Jesus now gave the man a second treatment by placing his hands again on his eyes, after which the man fixed his gaze on objects near and far and was at last able to see all things clearly. Does not this incident show that Jesus was no miracle worker and that he had to work in accordance with natural, spiritual, psychical laws? He could not at will or by a word of command or by a touch instantly heal the man. Everything depended upon conditions. I would not go so far as to say that each case needed individual and appropriate treatment, but some most certainly did. When the multitude sought to touch Jesus, the mass faith of the people who would not only have aided and stimulated the faith of each individual, but would have created a wide field of vibratory healing emanations. This accounts for such statements as, "Multitudes followed him and he healed them all." It would also account for the cures at healing services. After Jesus had healed the blind man, he sent him away to his home. He did not belong to Bethsaida, and strictly enjoined him not even to enter the village of Bethsaida. Why was that? It was because the people there were confirmed unbelievers and would have been skeptical and cynical about the cure. They would have said the kind of things such people say today. How long had he been supposedly blind? What caused the blindness? Is there any proof that he was blind? They only have thought he was blind, and even temporarily blinded by his own thought. Or, if they had been forced to admit that he was blind, they would have attributed the cure to the devil. In any case, their skepticism might easily have had a serious effect upon the man and facilitated a relapse into blindness. Jesus knew what tricks the human mind can play and how it can turn a complete somersault within a short space of time. That was one of his chief reasons for warning the healed against publishing the fact. "See thou tell no man. Pearls do not feed swine. They irritate them into trampling on them." The religious skeptic is the most bigoted of all skeptics. It irritates him to be told that something has been done which he has deemed and declared impossible. He smiles cynically and then proceeds to ridicule the whole idea and the person whom he regards as its victim. He then asks a series of questions which it is difficult to answer in his limited terminology. Yet, if we hesitate to answer, he pounces upon our hesitation as evidence of our own uncertainty and the weakness of our case. He assures us that we are the victims of an illusion, that we only thought we saw but did not really see. And even if we can prove that we have been healed in a supernormal way, the skeptic is quick to convince us that such healings are pathological and have nothing to do with faith or psychic power. In a word, he tramples upon our pearls. Such treatment cannot affect those who are familiar with the antics of this type of mind, but the ignorant may be seriously affected by it. Jesus knew how possible, and in some cases easy, it is for unbelievers to destroy the faith of believers. So he counseled those whom he had healed, "See thou tell no man." Or, as in the case of the healed madman of Gadara, "Tell thy friends how great things the Lord hath done unto thee." Spiritualists will do well to heed this invaluable counsel, for it is a principle on which God himself has ever worked. Knowing that revelation is dependent upon one's capacity to receive it, God has always adapted his self-manifestation to the condition and preparedness of man's mind. In one of those miniature pictures which give so vivid a charm to all his discourse, Jesus portrays a swineherd feeding his swine, not with barley grain, but with pearls. These valuable jewels in a swine's snout are of much less value than coarse grain. And not only so, but the tusk brutes, foiled of their meal, incensed against the herdsman who had duped them, rush upon him and trample him in the slough of their sties. We must exercise economy in our delivery of truth, and where the soil is untractable, we must prepare it before the seed is sown. End of chapter. We're going to stay right here and go to the next chapter. If you could be so kind and hit that like button, thank you so much. Let's move on now to chapter 13. Did Jesus feed 5,000 persons with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? It is reported that he did so by all 4 evangelists. Well, there is no sufficient reason to disbelieve this conjoint narrative of the 4 Gospels. There is, however, every reason to disbelieve that a miracle was performed by a miraculous person. A poor widow who was unable to pay her debts appealed to Elisha, who, finding that she had nothing but a pot of oil, bade her borrow as many empty pots as she could. He then told her to fill them with the oil from her own pot, and she found that it increased supernormally in the process. A man brought Elisha a gift of a few loaves and vegetables, and Elisha told his servant to feed 100 men with them. The servant exclaimed, "Am I to set these few loaves and vegetables before 100 men?" "Yes," said Elisha, "and they shall all eat and be satisfied and leave some over." And it was so. This story bears a strange resemblance to the feeding of the 5,000, and one ordained minister of the church assures us that the latter is molded on the former. That is a very natural supposition for one who knows nothing of psychic science, but quite unnecessary for one who does. But what is more to the point is this. If the feeding of the 5,000 was miraculous and was performed by a miraculous person who was God incarnate, then the feeding of the 100 and the multiplication of the widow's store of oil were miraculous and were performed by a miraculous person who was only slightly different in degree, not in kind, from God incarnate. The truth is that none of these so-called miracles was miraculous. They were psychical phenomena which were produced in strict accordance with psychical laws. To materialize something out of nothing from nowhere might indeed be described as miraculous. But, as there is no such thing as nothing and nowhere, let us cease to talk nonsense and pause to consider the nature of the objects which, in our generation, have come out of everywhere into here, the everywhere being the ether, the subtle medium which fills all space. While gems and pearls came into the veritable showers out of the everywhere into the circle of Stanton, Moses, and ordained priests of the Church of England, flower materializations are comparatively more frequent. At Madame d'Espérance's circle, in the presence of Aksakoff and Professor Butleroff, a golden lily, 7 feet high, appeared. On another occasion, there appeared a plant 22 inches in height, having a thickly wooded stem and bearing 29 leaves. Roses were frequently produced at her circles, and if a special colored rose was required, it was obtained. A black rose was asked for, and a rose of distinctly blue-black color was obtained, the like of which neither Madame Espérance nor any of those assembled had seen. Princess Karaja, who has very kindly written an introduction to one of my books, has had great experience of psychical phenomena and has told me of some of her sittings. She has been present at seances with Sir William Crookes, Camille Flammarion, Gustave Gelly, and other well-known psychical researchers. One of her astounding experiences was with the famous medium Frau Anna Roth, in the presence of more than 20 witnesses. Bouquets of flowers were seen suspended in mid-air. They then began to rain down upon a large table until there was a cubic yard of them, and each sitter took armfuls away. The amazing thing about it all was that when the seance began, there was no trace of the fragrance of flowers. But at its end, the room was filled with their perfume. The vicar of Otley, the Reverend Charles Tweedale, one of the greatest of psychical researchers and one of the best exponents of psychical science, assures us that, on one occasion, a shower of articles came apparently through the ceiling and fell upon a table, in the presence of 6 witnesses and in a good light. Now, if this vicar is deceiving us, or is not compormentis, why does not his bishop inhibit him? Well, that would be a rather difficult thing to do in view of the fact that the archbishop allowed this vicar's famous pamphlet, Present-Day Spirit Phenomena and the Churches, to be placed in the hands of every bishop present at one of the Lambeth conferences. And the Bishop of Liverpool was urged his clergy to read Mr. Tweedale's great book, Man's Survival After Death, and has written to him saying, "Now we must leave the leaven to work." According to the writer of the 4th Gospel, there are recorded for us only a very few of the signs which Jesus did. He goes so far as to say, if they should be written everyone, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that should be written. Jesus may quite well have caused flowers to be created for sick rooms as well as bread to be created for hungry multitudes. What is the explanation of such psychic phenomena? It seems probable that, in the presence of certain mediums, spirit operators, engineers, chemists, artists, etc., are able to extract a substance from persons, atmospheres, and ether, and mold it into flowers, or bread, or oil, or whatever is desired. These spirit operators work in accordance with natural, spiritual, psychical laws. Now, if it be said that modern psychical phenomena, which are analogous to those recorded in the Bible, have never been submitted to the severest test of science, the answer is twofold. A. They have been submitted to the severest test of science. I have a letter from Sir William Crookes in which he says so. B. The physical phenomena in the Bible have certainly never been submitted to any test whatever, other than the test of faith, which is no test. How educated men and women can believe the psychic happenings recorded in the Bible and yet disbelieve the facts of psychic science passes my comprehension. For my own part, I could not, unless I had first drugged my mind, believe any of the so-called miracles of the Bible unless similar phenomena occurred today. And I am not exceptional in this. I do not believe there is anyone who, having studied the results of modern biblical criticism, can believe in the so-called miracles of Scripture unless he can believe in the facts of psychic science. The Gospels are not verbally inspired. We cannot, in the light of modern knowledge, put our fingers on this verse or that verse and say, we know that Jesus said this and did that. And the result is that some of our leading biblical scholars have not only surrendered all belief in miracles, but are attributing the psychic stories in the Bible to Oriental imagination and hyperbole. The feeding of the 5,000 is either explained away or regarded as purely symbolical. Some scholars would have us believe that because the multitudes were on their way to the Passover feast, they had plenty of food with them. The people fed themselves. Other scholars tell us that the story is only a story, and one which Jesus told when discoursing about himself as the bread of life. Yet again, we are assured that the story is exaggerated and copied from an Old Testament legend which tells of Elisha feeding 100 men with a few loaves and vegetables. The fact is that these scholars are at a loss to know how best to interpret the psychic stories of the Bible. They cannot accept them at their face value. They know too much. But they do not know enough to enable them to realize that analogous happenings are occurring in their midst today. They will not face the facts. They have eyes that see not, and ears that hear not. They are blind and deaf because they do not want to see and hear. Why do they not want to see and hear? Because they know that if Crooks, Barrett, Lodge, Doyle, Tweedale, and others are right, they will be compelled to unlearn a very great deal of what they have learned. Biblical scholarship has shattered the foundations of traditional theology. It has destroyed all miracles. The old key to the temple of truth has rusted in its rusty lock. The door can no longer be opened, and the worshippers are perplexed as to how to gain entrance. Psychic science points the way to a secretly preserved door, which all who seek may find, and which opens to all who knock. End of chapter. Before we go on to the next video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends, and head over to the next video as we continue the reading of The Psychic Life of Jesus.